Good morning, everybody. Morning to those who are on the call. We should be able to start the launch of our survey report in the next 3 minutes. Let's give the next 3 minutes for a few more to join in. And we welcome you to this launch. So we'll begin shortly in 3 minutes. All right, I think we're ready to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the launch of the 4th series of KEPSA survey on the impact of COVID on businesses in Kenya. My name is Victor Gallo. I work at KEPSA as the head of public policy and public-private dialogue at KEPSA. With us are some of our members, colleagues, and members from the media fraternity that are in the house. We are happy to host you this morning as we share with you the findings from the survey that we did in the month of September and October. Just to begin by introducing KEPSA, we are a business apex body of Kenya that represents all businesses in the country. We got a membership that reaches out to over 500,000 businesses in Kenya. And the survey that we're just about to launch is one of the series of similar surveys we've done before in the month of March, in the month of April, and between May and June. And after the lifting of containment measures in July, we gave 2 months to pass, and then in the month of September and October, we carried out this particular survey just to check how the trends were changing. From the time we had containment measures strongly in place, and by the time we began to ease off some of them. And we have some very interesting findings to share with you. We've been able to work very closely in partnership with the government and other partners to cushion Kenyans to ensure businesses can stay afloat, particularly our SMEs, against the adverse effects of this particular global pandemic. So these surveys help us to understand how businesses are faring, but they also bring out some interventions that we reflect upon as KEPSA. We have a COVID committee that meets every Tuesday. So the interventions that come from the perspectives shared with us by businesses from these surveys help us a lot to shape up the discussions with government to continue cushioning not only Kenyans, but also the economy at large. The government has been able to respond. I believe you all have been listening to the presidential statements in putting in place economic stimulus and other measures, including easing off travel restrictions and phased reopening of the economy. As a result, of course, we've seen a resurgence in economic activities, improving significantly over the past few months. And we use the monthly Stanbic Bank's Purchasing Managers Index to also gauge how businesses, the pulse of businesses each and every month. And we've seen recently in July, the Stanbic's PMI points hit 54.2% in the month of July, before it rose to 56.3% in the month of September, and an all-time high of 59.1% in October. So basically what we are seeing here is the economic stimulus and the easing off of the first reopening of the economy is actually helping businesses to get back into activity. But also the pandemic has particular effects on job losses that we'll reflect upon as we present to you the outcome of the survey. And there are also new opportunities that are emerging. The survey tells us that actually in this time of the pandemic, we've actually seen new opportunities that businesses have been able to take advantage of that were not there. So we know there's a pandemic, but there are also some surprises in form of the findings that we see coming out. In October, the IMF revised its growth projection for the whole global economy from negative 4.9%, which was projected in June, and that has come down to negative 4.4%, with developing economies like Kenya expecting to contract by 3.3%. So this slow recovery is expected to be felt in 2021, making it imperative for countries like Kenya to focus on sound economic policies and strategies for faster recovery. So this particular survey helps us to bring out those perspectives that we happily share with government as we shape up the economy together. So we launched this fourth survey in order to understand these dynamics and to identify policy options and opportunities to accelerate the country's recovery process and to strengthen business resilience. So going into methodology, let me just share this with you. Going into methodology and the demographics of this particular survey. It was an online survey using a tool called SurveyMonkey. We had a total of 30 questions, 4 out of which were demographic questions. The period when we conducted this particular survey was 14th September to 15th October, so basically a month. And we received and cleaned out feedback from 428 businesses. This time round, unlike in May, June, a lot of feedback came from the construction, people in the construction sector, professional services, energy, transport, education and environment. That's the distribution of the responses as we received them. And sectors that had less than 5 responses in any questions were not included in the sectoral analysis for those different questions. In terms of looking at the distribution of the respondents by the size of their business, the micro enterprises had the highest responses. Those are enterprises that have employees of between 1 and 9, followed by larger enterprises that employ more than 100 people, and then small enterprises, 14%, and medium scale enterprises that have between 51 to 100 employees, like 9%. So of the 428 businesses that responded, 43%, I think I've just highlighted that. So basically that was the distribution of the respondents by the size of their businesses. I will now call upon KEPSA Director Patricia Idau to give us highlights of the findings as we received them. So Patricia, if you're on the call, please turn on your video and mute yourself, and please take us through the findings.
Okay. Good afternoon. Oh, still morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Victor, for the preamble and giving the context around how this survey was done. So I am going to just share the highlights on the survey, and I'll focus on the 7 areas that I think are very, very important for us to understand, to internalize, and to look at from that perspective. So if I start straight away in the first area that we looked at, which was really around what was the overall impact to business that COVID has had over this time period. And so if I look at that, if I move now and talk about this particular area, we see that half the businesses actually reported that the impact continues to be very, very high on them. And it is slightly reduced from what the survey we done in May to June. And this again starts to demonstrate that with the easing of the restrictions that were put in place, there was some recovery in the businesses, but still 50% of businesses are saying that impact continues to be very, very high. When we look at where that impact is, where the shoe is pinching the most, as expected, it's the micro enterprises that are most impacted, with 2/3 of the micro enterprises, and we did say micro being these ones with a 1 to 9 employees. And as you can imagine, that's the highest part of our economy. When we look at the micro enterprises, those are the highest sector from that perspective. 2/3 of those actually were reporting a very high negative impact on businesses. But when you look at the larger enterprises, because they have a lot more cushioning and they have measures in place, you found that perhaps they were not as impacted as a small micro. So this is not a surprise. What came out, it is what is expected. When you are a smaller business, you have less cushion, less buffers, and you're just working a lot of the times hand to mouth. But the positive thing that we found out is, at least with the easing of restrictions, a lot of them started to recover and get back some of the business. So the next area that I'll talk to is around the impact, the extent, if we look at it by sector, I've said that it's mainly the micro, but if you look at these sectors, as expected, and what here you focus on is the red and the maroon lines, you see that tourism, as we've always spoken about, remains the hardest hit sector, followed by education, and then to some extent, manufacturing and wholesale. But what you also note, and what we actually found out, is that some of this is picking up. So if you look at tourism, in the May to June season, we found that a lot more had the red band, which is a very, very high impact. But when we came to this last survey, that has reduced. And what we find is that with the opening of the economy from July, as you know, that's when all the counties were open for travel, air travel opened. We started to see a lot more local tourism, people, Kenyans actually starting to travel and enjoy local tourism, go to see all the wonderful sites that we have. And that at least contributed to a small amount of recovery for that particular sector. And similarly, the education sector as well, we started to see a slight improvement from the negative impact, because again, some schools opened, people had already started to rethink how they refine their online offerings, and these started to come in play, which supported some of that recovery. The sectors which we find had the biggest shift over this period with the reopening is when you look at finance and insurance, where in the season where there was stronger restrictions, what 40% high impact, and with the reopening in this last survey, they talk about 17%. So that is around the effect by sector. Now I'd like to move on to the next area that we were looking at, the financial impact, because when you sit, we say, yes, I have been impacted, but how? And of course, when we look at the how, it's really around the financial aspect of it. So if you look at that, almost a tenth of all the businesses surveyed had losses above 90% of their last year revenue. I mean, 90%. So if you've got a tenth of businesses saying that their business is only at 10% of where they were last year, it goes to show you the impact from a financial perspective, and how indeed a lot of businesses actually have nearly shut down over this period. So if you look at this, yes, there are half of them who are saying they're moderate losses, and there's another third that say there's 50% losses. But that again is not the same when you look at the size of the businesses. The impact, as we said at the beginning, when I was saying the impact, of course, will always harm the smaller enterprises more than the bigger enterprises who have deeper pockets, who have bigger buffers, and a lot more ability to manage and to have some business continuity processes and contingencies in place. So what you do see is that 2/3 of the micro enterprises, as you can imagine, are now operating at half of the financial position that they were in. And when you look at their losses being, now operating at 10% or less of what they have, again, you see the biggest impact there being the micro enterprises, and to some extent, the larger enterprises from this perspective. So then I go on from, if I look at that impact by sector, again, it will reflect, the next slide, Victor. That will be reflected again when we talked about the sectors that are most hit, and that again is the same reflection as the overall business picture, where it's the same sectors, starting with tourism, education, which you start to see the impact financially hits them a lot higher over this period. But I think what is interesting to also note when you look at the this particular slide around the financial impact, we start to see that a lot of businesses with the reopening have recovered significantly. And it's not just some, actually a lot of them. If you look at environment, 11% in this season versus 50% when we had very high restrictions, huge improvement with the reopening. We look at others which are showing another big growth area, being even agriculture from 17 to 50%, or transport and storage moving from 23% to 60%. So clearly the message that was given that the shutdown had very deep financial implications is demonstrated and comes through from the responses that we got from the business leaders and the businesses that contributed to the survey. I'll then now look at where the major sources of impact in business came. As expected, with the closure, with the current restrictions on movement and market dynamics, the first thing that you find is that there's a drop of sales. With increased liquidity and financial challenges, that's a follow through, because if everybody has lower customers, lower footfall, if you're retail, even banks and financial institutions, lower borrowings, then all those things start to impact your ability to draw and get customers into your business. And that, of course, led to the increased financial and liquidity challenges. But having said that, there was a flip side to all that, because what COVID has done as well is it has led to an increase in the cost of operations. Because when you start to see what it is you had to do now to continue to run a business, irrespective of your size, the PPE implications, the cost of, even if you look at our transport sector, the fact that you cannot run to full capacity. If you're a restaurant, you cannot hold full capacity. So all those things started to drive both two things: a reduction in who you can have, but also then an increase in the cost of your operation, because you had to have all these health protocols in place. And then I guess the saddest thing, of course, becomes the employees, because there's an effect to that. If there's no liquidity, there's no business. The impact has been that a lot of people have had to either lose their jobs, which was the worst case, go on unpaid holidays, or actually work on reduced salaries. So those are some of the top areas that we tend to look at when you look at how this COVID has really affected businesses. So if I move to the next slide, which is really around the COVID, I've already said that if you look at who it has impacted, micro will always be the most affected from a liquidity. They cannot pay their people. And what I'll be speaking to towards the end is the implication to that on their ability to remain open as businesses. So then I'd like now go to the area around impact of COVID on business closure, because all these, I think the slides will be available, and we can look at all the top challenges by sector in terms of their ability to continue to stay open. So if we look at job losses, and business closure, because as you can imagine, this is a very key area that we need to monitor. So when we look at the closure, the most impacted were the micro enterprises. And I'll keep emphasizing this point, that if you look at what has happened to our economy, most people, where most jobs come from is actually from the micro enterprises. It's from the people who are eking a living or running a business, a very small business, perhaps employing 1 to 2 to a maximum of 9 people. And those are the people who have been the hardest hit because, first of all, with no businesses, people coming in, if you are running a little shop around the road and there's no business, all businesses have closed, you have no customers. If you have no customers, it then means you cannot continue to stay open. You have no cushioning in terms of saving or financial retained earnings, which you can use, which the bigger businesses can speak to. So what you find is that a lot of them actually had to close over this period. And they could not continue to retain people. They could not continue to have their employees there because there was simply no business. So 75% of micro enterprises actually shut down over this period, which is a very, very painful thing. And even small enterprises, and even going to medium enterprises, a lot of them, because of the buffers they had, they managed to stay open. But I think the message that we're making and why it was so important that with the observation of health, the government actually felt it was imperative that some reopening happens, is especially because of the impact it had had on this very, very large sector and business community who provide most of the employment for us as a country. So if I go to the next slide, if you look at those closures, which sectors, again, we've talked to tourism, and we cannot emphasize how hard tourism and hospitality has been hit. Because when we look at 92% of anybody in the tourism hospitality sector being shut down, because again, when you look at the impact that they have, this is where you have the most interaction. This is where people would be the most nervous to move to. So this is a sector, not only has it remained the hardest hit, it will probably continue to remain the hardest hit. But we did see some recovery within the season with the reopening, because again, people started to get the confidence. The government put in place a lot of health protocols to allow these sectors to open. And at least we started to see some recovery, with at least another third of the ones that had shut down being able to reopen and to start business. The other areas, construction, transport, also managed to reopen. And then if we look at wholesale and retail, a lot of them who had closed managed to reopen, but we still have about 50% of wholesale and retail shops because of the reduced footfall, reduced customer base, reduced market. We still have a number of them remaining closed. The only upside in this whole area is the sector of finance and insurance, who did not report any closures. But again, given the role they play in supporting a lot of us in the economy, it was imperative that they stayed open. And in manufacturing, I think a number also, a very small percentage managed to stay closed, because again, I guess there was an element of trying to continue to produce to support normal living and normal FMCG goods that we live on. So if I then move on then to the jobs layoff and job losses, 2/3 of businesses managed to retain their employees, which was a big positive. And I think you find that in that retention plan, you'll find that a lot of them were retained because businesses were very creative. They were able to, have employees stay on reduced salary. There was a lot of initiative done around more innovative ways around the way people worked, just so that, the businesses were able to at least continue to provide that employment for their people. So if you look at retrenchment, yes, 39 retrench in this season compared to a much higher number in the May to June season when the restrictions were at their highest. For those who had closed and reopened, we found that 2/3 of them brought back a lot of their employees. And in some cases, we still found that 21% of those businesses, e.g. schools, still remain closed. So in the education sector, we found that the recovery on job losses was not as strong as would have been expected. Yeah. And as expected, the retrenchments, of course, happened at the junior level most, and then mid-level and the senior level being the least hit when this happened. I think if I go to the point that I was saying in the layoffs, of course, the hardest hit sectors correspondingly, of course, had the highest job layoffs, which of course is not a surprise, because with the impact on your business and your ability to continue to remain open, the implication, of course, is that you had to take the hard decisions around people. And the good thing is, as I said, finance, insurance, they reported no retrenchments, yeah, perhaps because of the nature of that particular sector. So if we look at, if I move on to the next one, Victor, I won't talk to business size. I think that, again, is indicative. Smallest will have the biggest, and the bigger organizations will have lower numbers. So if we look at the support that businesses talked to, that they gave, I did highlight that there was a lot of work in the season done around counseling. There was a lot of creativity around making sure that the pay, that people were not, the pay was not 100% no pay. We found that there was a lot of creativity around how businesses thought through the support for their staff over this period, and I think this was very, very commendable for a lot of businesses, and even the rethinking of, even if we can't pay you, how do we support your reskilling? How do we look at how we offer outplacement support so that you can continue to earn a living, even though as a business I'm not able to continue to retain you as an employee? Okay, so I think now I'd like to shift gear and talk about the mitigation and the recovery processes that have been in place, and what have been the measures undertaken to ensure that there is business continuity during this pandemic period. I think if you look at the top four, which a lot of people covered, I mean, the first thing is, as expected, business started to look very critically at their expenditure and stop all non-core business activities. Unfortunately, some of those non-core become areas like training, travel was a very, very big hit. And travel, of course, in that reduction had the impact. And that's why you see tourism becoming and travel becoming one of the biggest hit area, because suddenly now, with no travel allowed, it's suddenly become a non-core business activity. And that is where the businesses started to look at from a perspective of reduction of spend right at the beginning. If you look at expansion plans, a lot of business suspended all those new investments and expansion plans. There was a whole need to look at the workforce and looking at how do you furlough staff. A lot of organizations put in place the points that I raised in the previous slide around reduced pay, furlough, where you go on unpaid leave, but with a promise of when things pick up, you will come back and you get your job. If you look at e-commerce and the growth of e-commerce and online and mobile technologies, incredible growth in that area. In fact, even businesses that before could not imagine and fathom how they supply using e-commerce and mobile found ways to do that. I think if you look at least for me personally, when I look at where I have managed to buy a lot of things now, it has been on mobile technologies I didn't consider. The number of things I could buy on Instagram now, I buy because the messages come through on Facebook. Incredible innovation and transformation for organizations to continue to be able to serve using these platforms, which are a lot more safe and allowed you to continue to do business without the physical contact. And then, of course, the conversation I talked to, the reduced salaries and all the other areas that are highlighted down there. So if we talk then from a business recovery process, we ask these businesses, when you look into the future, if anybody could have a crystal ball and you're able to sit down and look and say, yes, there's a phased reopening of the economy. Yes, recovery has been slow, but if we ask you, when do you think full recovery will happen? a lot of businesses still remain optimistic that it is going to be next year. But what you find is there's still a quarter of the businesses interviewed saying that we're still going to have another very, very tough year with recovery only coming in 2022. So that, I think, is a reality that we face at the moment. And as we see this new wave coming up, taking us into a very high, riding on a very, very high peak expenditure season called Christmas and into January, those effects, we believe, will continue to be carried into the next year. So, the reflection there by the businesses that a lot of them actually feel that it's probably closer to next year and also going into 22 starts to play out as we look at the current situation and what we are going through now. So if I then go into very quickly by sector, I think we'll leave that to be gone through. There's optimism, varied optimism by some sectors, but if you look at the ones that are looking, who tend to be a lot more optimism, is a health, the transport areas, manufacturing and education, and of course finance and insurance, which was not as hard hit. But the uncertainty, of course, continues in the areas of wholesale, tourism, which has been the hardest hit, and environment, because for them it is very difficult to predict with the pandemic and the implication it has on the way we live. It becomes very, very difficult for them to look and to see, with us having no predictions of where it's going to go, how they can recover in that context. So over this time, of course, the government has had a number of business interventions to support the recovery. And these, I must say also, as KEPSA, done a lot of work. We did a lot of work at the beginning, and with our standing COVID business committee meeting, really constantly looking at, from an advocacy point of view, what interventions can support businesses over this period. And what we found out is some of the most beneficial interventions that came through was a reduction of VAT, with half the respondents saying that really helped them. The removal of inter-county movement. This happened in July, as you know, because that was when Mombasa, Nairobi was opened up. So again, the movement really, really helped support the reopening of a lot of businesses. About 40% did speak to the reduction of pay-as-you-earn being a great intervention, and of course, the reduction of corporate tax. Other interventions that they said really helped was, of course, pushing back the curfew hours, which then allowed businesses to work a little bit longer. And of course, a resumption of flying, both international and, I guess, with the opening up of the different counties, also inter-county flying really supported. And then, of course, this big area about the payment of the pending bills and refunds, that's still businesses saying a lot more needs to be done, because only 9% and 5% of businesses really benefited from that. So only look at the intervention that still has a lot of opportunity. It is really around the payment of those pending bills, because with that cash and VAT refunds, with that cash coming in, it helps really fill the hole that a lot of businesses have right now in terms of liquidity and their ability to keep their businesses open. And then we run down to all the other areas, but those were the top 3 that businesses talked to. Okay, so in summary, I want to, on this area of business and everything, before I look at everything else, is if we look at the skills for the future and what businesses spoke to when they look at, given what we've been through, what we've seen this year, what we feel are going to be the skills for the future that we need as businesses if we're to survive, and the learnings this pandemic has taught us. So the first thing is with the retrenchment, and that has happened, one of the biggest things that has come out is that we really need to work on the hiring of technology skills and rebuilding this whole soft skills areas. So if you look at half the businesses who responded, they said, here we are, we need to shift our business to a more technology base, because that is the impact that has happened with the inability to have physical contact. Technology became the answer. But now in that technology basis, now we need to hire people with those skills. So really trying to hire people with those skills was one of the biggest demands and one of the challenges half the businesses said. Finding those people, looking for them, and being able to bring them on board was one of the biggest areas they had. The other area is this thing called soft skills. And soft skills is the ability then to have people who can think outside the box, people who can move from what they currently do and have the ability to just be creative, innovative, and really drive the whole area of business development, be able to lead more from the front as opposed to being led. So if you look at the jobs of the future, people with those particular skills will increasingly have more demand. And the businesses reflected that in their feedback on this in this research. I think that's the most important thing that I want to highlight on this particular slide, that that is what people are looking at. So if we look at it, the top skills, as I've highlighted, just go back again, you can see that the whole area of creativity becoming a big thing, creative thinking, adaptability, problem solving, and communication, really becoming areas now from a soft skill that, hold you in good stead, and that businesses are saying that's what we needed now, because the world was changing every single day. And what COVID has done, it has also created uncertainty. So with every business plan you create, it has to change because things change, there's no predictability, and even those who are predicting actually do not really know. And we have seen that even as a country, because here we were with our first and our second and whichever wave we're at now, so many things changing and having to adapt to that as we go, as opposed to being able to predict it with any certainty. I will now move to the slide called Future Workforce. So if you look at the future workforce, just move to that slide. No, go back one. That's the top skill, go back one more. So skills for the future workforce, that, am I missing one? Skills for the future. Okay, so if we look at that, I've talked to that particular slide. Let's go to the next one. Just go to the next one. Technology skills, I've spoken to that. And so if you look at the future workforce, the type of roles that businesses now are saying they'll plan to hire is increasingly now what COVID has taught businesses is that you need to have a more flexible and an organization that allows you to drive to have a lot more flexibility. And what does that mean? It means you're going to have more contract, more gig, more consultants, because those then allow you to be able to look for what you need when you need it. And it reduces the permanency in terms of the structure that you have. So that whole area of flexibility in the operations is something that businesses are saying they're going to really need to have going forward. And it's going to have an implication then in terms of how they hire, how they recruit, and how they resource their businesses. Also, when we look at businesses, only half of the businesses are saying that they're going to focus more on employing permanent and full-time roles. Again, building onto the first point, that perhaps the future of work is going to be a lot more contract, a lot more temporary, a lot more flexible. And so these highlights the importance of focusing on this gig economy, as we call it, and equipping, in particular, the youth with these necessary skills that we've talked to, because then they're able to really play into and offer themselves into the opportunities that basically arise. So with that, I think that is my last slide. And I think I will leave it there, and we will then open the floor for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I think you pulled it through so well and explained many things. Friends on the call, please, we're now at that juncture where we've received the survey findings. And should you have any questions, please just use the hand raise function there for us to know who you are, and please introduce yourself. I will now check on the participants. Please, by show of hands, let's see who may be having a question. There's also the chat function that you can use to post your questions.
Yes, I see there's one point that is people skills instead of soft skills. I think the two are used interchangeably. And we will, I guess we play based on the one which is the buzz one for the season. And people skills, yes, increasingly is becoming used as well as interchangeably with soft skills.
Thank you for that, Patricia. I can see Kefa's hand is up. Kefa, please unmute yourself and ask the question. Kindly introduce yourself.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Kefa Muirore with Radio Citizen. And my question pertains perhaps the hit. We are seeing a large hit on micro businesses. There are those who have closed, unfortunately, and they are yet to get back up. I don't know what will take to have this business come back to life. And for my last question, looking at the government interventions, like the survey has pointed out, there's been a bit of a limited impact in terms of what is VAT refunds and so on. And in particular now, linking this back to the micro businesses, there was a plan to have that SME credit guarantee scheme. And I'm curious to know from a KEPSA standpoint, I mean, is it too late to even bring these on board? We knew businesses needed these as immediate assistance, but we were given a date of October, but we are now well through November, we still don't have that. And I don't know whether then the government is too slow then to respond. Should it be looking at alternatives, perhaps partner in the private sector to try and assist businesses? Because it seems to be too, it's too lethargic in its own response by what it has had as interventions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kefa. I think we'll be responding to that. Any other question? Please use the function to raise up your hand. I think, Kefa, just to come on to your question on the credit guarantee scheme, this is something that we've called for, I think, for the last 3 years. And finally, we were happy when the president gave an indication that he supports it and that it will be provided for by law. We're also having a meeting with Treasury, CS Ukuriatani on Monday, to look at the economic recovery measures. So this is something that will also feature there. I think by then we should be able to have more concrete confirmation of the status of this particular issue. So look forward to the meeting on Monday with Treasury.
And then also, I think spoke to some of the, the interventions that we've started. If you look at the program we have with Mastercard, where again, we're inviting businesses at that particular level to come and apply for grants, which Mastercard has done. So that is actually opened at least for the KEPSA membership. So we've started things in the ways that we can as we look to the bigger government interventions. So I think we could also speak to that, and we could share with you the background to that particular program.
Happy to take more questions, please. If you can't raise up your hand, just unmute yourself and speak, but please introduce yourself. Yeah, we will be sharing, I'll be posting this, so stay on the line. We'll be posting this report on the group chat. You can download it. And later on, an hour later, we should be able to have the recording of this particular presentation. I can see we don't have any more questions. All right, then we are good to go. Let me take a moment and share the presentation on the group chat. Please wait on and download it before we close.
Victor, there's a question around how much of the feedback incorporates border service providers. It's incredible, actually. If we look at one of the sectors that have really grown is technology, but the borders have really supported them because of the delivery process. Would we be able to know how many borders, anybody with border business, how many of them would have given feedback to the survey?
No, we wouldn't know this.
We
wouldn't know this. We just looked at businesses by the scale of their size, but in terms of who within those sectors said what, so maybe yes, border service providers may have operated, but we would not be able to distinguish because again, we kept anonymity to the questions to encourage more openness.
Okay. And there's a question about the Mastercard program. Where can we post it for people to have visibility of it?
This is always actually, it's always on the CAPSA Twitter handle. If there's so much information that we are sharing on the Twitter, and I think anybody who is interested, but I think Ehud, if you are on the call, or Harrison, are you able to? Yeah, are you able to just come on this particular question? But there's so much on our website. There's also so much that we share on a daily basis on the CAPSA Twitter handle. Every day, I think for the last 1 month, we've been sharing that information. So I encourage you to just check our website. There's so much you'll learn about that. And yeah.
Hello, Victor.
Yes, please.
James is here and he would like to respond to the question on Mastercard.
Oh yeah, please.
Just a moment. Victor, perhaps you could pose the question again because he was not on the call. I just called him.
We want to, if we just share the details of the Mastercard Foundation grant process to support MSMEs. And if we have the link, we can post it on the chat.
Okay, my name is James Korea. Yes, we are currently offering the loans to MSMEs that have been affected by the COVID and are not able to access financing from the main financial institutions. These loans are interest-free. That means the interest is 0% and no collateral attachment to the loans. And the minimum amount that we are offering is 100,000 and a maximum of 1.5 million. So to be eligible for the loan is we are targeting women and youth, and that means at least 50% of the business that is benefiting should have at least 50% ownership or shareholding by women or youth, and able to repay this loan within a period of 6 months. So that's the repayment period that we have. And of importance lastly is that they have to be KEPSA members directly or indirectly. So that's it for the loan application. I'll also be sharing it on chat, but it is www.smekepsa.or.ke.
Okay.
Sorry, James, I lost you. I don't know whether it's on my end only.
I think it's on your end. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay,
just post that link, James, please, to everyone.
Okay, yes, I'll share it on chat.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. Any further question, please? Just unmute and ask, because we are closing in the next 2 minutes. I'm posting the report on the group chat right away.
Thank you, James, for me to be humble.
Anthony, please mute yourself.
Okay.
All right, so I think, thank you very much, Patricia. We're done with this. And we hope that we can continue doing this. And should you have any other question, those on the call, please, you can reach us. I'm posting my email address. Anthony, you can also post your email address and number for those who may want to reach out for membership of KEPSA.
Victor, the presentation link has, oh, it's come through now. Because it was big. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning. All the best.
Thank you so much, everybody. I've posted the presentation. Please download it before we close. All right, we are good to go. Asanteni, have a good afternoon.